Well, hey Divi Nation, welcome to a brand new Divi use case live stream where each week we show you how to add new design and functionality to your Divi websites. And in this live stream today, we're going to be showing you how you can create a beautiful image collage for your Divi website in minutes using the new built-in Divi position options. We'll be highlighting specifically the absolute position position type to build this image collage. So without wasting any time, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. But before we do that, don't forget to check the video description for more info on this live stream as we go along. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Make sure that I'm coming in loud and clear. Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Make sure that you can hear me okay and that my live stream is coming through for everyone. And feel free to say hello. Let us know where you're from, how your day is going, and of course, any questions that you have during this live stream, feel free to post them in the chat. Hopefully I can get to those. If not, somebody in there should be able to help you. And if those two things aren't helpful to you, you can always reach out to our live support through our chat on our website. So, all right. Thank you. Looking like we're coming in loud and clear. Got champagne bottles and thumbs up. That's a good sign. All right. All right, so you can see on my screen here, this is actually the wrong blog post. I'm gonna go back to let me go to our little preview here of what we're going to be doing today. And this is the interactive image collage. And this is, you know, a great design and also a great functionality you can add to your website to showcase your work. As you can see right here, I have some hover effects and some cool scaling that takes place when I hover, and also a z-index, which puts that image above the others when you hover over it. And of course, you have the lightbox functionality when clicking on the image. That's all built into the Divi settings. These are using image modules, positioned absolutely using the built-in position options, and it is going to be responsive as well. And let me just go ahead and show you. Oops. Let me go to our blog here and make sure that you know about our the blog post that goes along with this tutorial. It's actually right here. So feel free to go to this blog post for any more information or details that I may not get to in our live stream together. All right, so let's jump in and get started. This is a brand new page. I'm going to be using the Divi Builder to build visually. And so to get started, I'm just going to add a one column row, or I guess a one column to a full column to this section here. And in fact, before I go in and add any modules, I'm just going to set up my section and row to kind of, and also my column as kind of like a good canvas before we start adding our absolutely positioned elements or our images. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and make, let's go to my row settings, and I'm going to open up that, and let me scale this down a bit. Move this over. And I'm going to pick a custom gutter width, and I'm going to do that because I don't want any extra margins added in between my modules or in between columns or anything like that. So I'm just going to set my gutter width to 0. And I want my width, this is very important, to span the full width of my section or my browser window. That's very important because I'm going to be using some relative length units, or basically the VW length unit, which is, you know, a length unit other than like pixels, which is a more absolute length unit. I'm going to use the VW length unit for responsive design. That way my images will kind of stay in place. The design will stay in place throughout our design. And in order for that to happen, since it's the VW length unit is based on the full, or excuse me, the width of my browser window, it's important that the container also is going to be equal to the browser width as well. If that's at all confusing, don't worry, it'll make sense as we go along, hopefully. It's not actually important that you understand it, but for those of you who appreciate that kind of thing, I'm just offering it up for you. All right, so make sure it's 100% width. And my max width, I want to make sure I don't have a set max width because I also want to make sure it goes the full width of my browser window. All right, excuse me. Let's go ahead and add a little padding. I'm going to add in here, again, I'm using my VW length unit for padding. So that's 5 VW, excuse me, at the top and the bottom. And I'm going to go to my advanced tab, to my visibility here, and I'm going to hide the overflow, because if you're building an image collage, sometimes you'll want to, you know, have your images kind of go outside the browser. And when you do that, especially on the right side, you might have this, you know, problem where your browser will scroll to the right a little bit. So if you add the overflow hidden, that won't do that. Okay, so let's go ahead to our column settings now. That takes care of our row. You can see my row now spans the full width of my browser there. That's good. But I need to also edit my column settings. Now, to do that, I got to go back to my row settings, and then there's my column there. So I'm just going to open up my column settings. And for this specific design, because I'm going to be adding elements absolutely within the column itself, I want to give my column a set height. And to do that, I'm going to actually add a custom CSS to do that. All right, so I'm going to do a height of 40 VW. So that's basically 40% of the width of my browser. And so, but I want to make sure and correct it on phone. So I'm going to deploy my responsive tabs here. And this is for my main element here for my column. So I want my column to have a custom height of 40 VW or viewport width on desktop. But when I get to phone, I want it to be back to auto, which is the default. So make sure that's like the height is back to auto, so because we want it to be back to normal whenever we get to a phone display. All right, so that's basically the only thing I need to do for my column, and I'm going to save my settings. Now with that set up, you can see now my row is, I have a 5 VW padding, and then the height, that white space in there, is actually the column height, and it is set to 40 VW. All right. Now let's go ahead and add our first of many absolute position elements. And the first, we're going to do this, before I go on, this is a very important tip. So whenever you start adding absolute elements to your page, you want to make sure that whatever to set a relative position to its parent or ancestor container. So here, the modules, we know all modules exist within a column. So we want to make sure that column has a position relative. So I'm going to go back to my column settings just so you can see that. And go to my advanced tab, go to position. You can see that by default, your column will have a position relative set to it. And that's because the container needs to be a positioned element. The default, if it were, for example, a static position, then that if you start positioning absolute elements within a column that's in a static position, it would just find the next one above it. So just remember, if you're ever going to start positioning modules absolutely, you'll want to make sure that column is in the relative position, but thankfully Divi has already thought of that and does that by default. All right, so let's go ahead and save that out. And now when we position our modules in our column here, it's going to be directly related to the column container. So I can position my modules within my column without it going outside of my column, if that makes sense to you. Hopefully it does. So the first one I'm going to do is a text module. So I'm going to add a text module. This is going to be basically my title for the section here, for my image collage section. And I'm just going to give it an H2 heading here. Just call it recent work. And give it a quick design. Go to my heading text, go to my H2 tab, give it a custom font, Limelight, and I want to align it centered. Give it a custom color here. You know, something like that. And then let's go ahead and give it a text size of, let's do 5 VW. And that'll work really well on, you know, desktop and tablet, but it might get a little too small on phone. So when I get to my phone, I want to change it to basically just 50 pixels. And that way I can have a consistent height on phone displays. All right, and I want to make sure my width of my module is set to, let's do 100%. And I'm going to give it a max width of 35 VW. And I want to make sure that that changes on tablet. Let's give it 35 VW for, tablet as well. But when I get to phone, I want to set my max width to 100% so that it spans the full width. All right. As you can see, it's aligned to the left there. But I'm going to give it a horizontal offset here when I make my position absolute. So let's go ahead and do that. So here's where we make what we did just now was basically design. Now we're going to position it absolutely. So to do that, go to my advanced tab, go to position options, and then select absolute. And so this here, the location, this would be kind of like the offset point, or the point in which you add your vertical offset. And we're going to choose the top left, which is the default location point there. And, you know, if I changed it around, you know, you can see you can move it around. This would be your kind of like your point in which your offsets will start to adjust the position of your element from this point. All right, so I'm going to start to the top left, and then I'm going to make my horizontal offset. This is going to move it over to the right, 35 VW. There you go. And since I'm using the VW length unit, it will stay in that spot as I adjust the browser width. All right. Okay, that looks good. Let me go ahead and save that out. And that takes care of my text module here, which is positioned absolutely. But now we can start adding our images. So this is where the fun starts. And before I add my first one, I just want to make sure and welcome anyone who is just joining us today. Welcome to our Divi use case live stream, where we show you how to add new design and functionality to your Divi websites every week. And this week we're showing you how you can build a custom interactive image collage for your Divi website using the built-in position options that are now available within the Divi builder. So make sure to check out the blog post that goes along with this tutorial. There's a link for that in the video description, and so make sure you check that out. All right, let's go ahead and continue. I'm just going to check real quick in the comments here in the chat, see if I have any questions I can address. Hello, Paul, Patrick, Scott, Uncle Social, Amanda, welcome everyone. Glad to see y'all interacting in the chat there. Let's see. Hopefully, looks like we have Al says he got a sound problem on Facebook. I apologize if that's on my end. I don't. It seems to be okay for everyone else. So maybe check your volume on your computer. All right. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started adding our images. So to do that, I'm going to add a new module. So I'm going to add an image module. There it is. And you can see because my text module is positioned absolutely, it's going to kind of float outside of the normal flow of the document or the page. So let's go ahead and add our custom image that we want to display. Okay, let's choose this one. And for the interactive element, I'm going to make sure and open it in Lightbox. And another interactive element I want to add to my image is a hover effect. And there's two hover effects you can add here that we're going to add to our image. The first one would be a filter, which I'm going to bring down the saturation to 0 by default, which makes it black and white. And then on hover, I'm going to deploy my hover effect here, my hover tab. I'm going to bring it back to 100%. So that way the image will show in color when you hover. And I'm going to combine that hover effect with a scale hover effect, which basically is going to enlarge that image on hover. So I'm going to go to my transform option here, click my hover tab, select transform scale, which is already selected, and then I'm just going to bring it up by 15%. And that way on hover, you can see that it's going to show in full color and also just kind of enlarge just a tad. And what's cool about this is that we can add all of these settings to one image, and then once that's done, all we need to do is duplicate the image when creating the rest of them, and we don't have to go through this process for each and every one of them. All right, let's go ahead and position it now. We're going to go to our advanced tab, position options, and you can see the default position that's actually static. But we're going to select absolute. We're going to keep that default location where it is. You can see, I didn't mention this earlier, but whenever you select to position an item, you'll get some other options below here, like the vertical and horizontal offsets, but also Z-index. Z-index applies only to positioned elements, and so it will apply to absolute elements as well. So on desktop, we want to have a desktop and what was I going to say? Oh yeah, tablet, we're going to have absolute. But when we get to phone, we're going to change it back to the default, and we'll do that in a second. So the locations, top left, vertical offset for this one, let's just make it 5 VW. And then for the horizontal offset, let's do a negative 2 VW. All right. All right. And I think that just about does it. I do want to add a hover effect for my Z-index because, sorry, there's my hover. My hover, I do want to make sure that the image stays above the rest on hover. Because there will be some overlapping of our images in the collage. So we want to make sure that whenever you hover over an image, it's going to rise above the other images in the Z plane, in the Z axis there. And so I'm going to give it a Z index of 2 on hover. All right, there you go. Now let me go ahead and go back here and deploy my responsive options here. Go to my phone tab, and I'm going to select default on phone display. That way it will show, like it normally would, just a single column of images, one after the other on phone display. All right, let's go back to our desktop. And as you can see, my image is a bit large there. So I'm just going to shrink it down. I'm going to go to my design settings, and I'm going to give it a custom, let's see, size here. Right now it's set to 100% width. I'm going to give it I'm going to leave that, but for my max width here, I'm going to give it a max width of 20 VW. So that's going to be 20, basically 20% of the width of the browser window. All right, and then just for my responsive settings, I'm going to keep the same on tablet. So make sure to give it 20 VW on tablet. And then for phone, though, I'm going to give it a 100% width. And also for phone, on my basic width, I'm just going to change it to about 75%. That way we have some margin on each side on phone. And that should take care of it. Okay. Let's see our box shadow. Let's go ahead and add a box shadow to our image. And I think that's pretty good for our first image. We want to make sure, I just want to make sure all the design elements are in place before I start duplicating it. And one thing you'll notice about the absolute or the position options is that once you position something in Divi, like give it a relative position, an absolute position, or a fixed position, you have this nice little draggable position icon here. And this allows you to position it visually in real time wherever you want. And this is really cool, especially when designing an image collage, because you can place the image anywhere you want. And because we're using these nifty responsive length units like VW, we can make sure it'll make sure it stays in place in the design. So I'm going to duplicate this one to make my next image. We got our template here basically. So I'm going to duplicate it, and notice I duplicated it, but it stays exactly kind of layered on top of the other. That's because it's inheriting the same absolute position, size, and everything. So you're going to duplicate it, and then you're going to start dragging it around. See? Now I can just use my built-in draggable position option here to place it. And if you look closely, it's using the VW length unit because that's what we have set already. So those little length units that show up at the top right by our little icon there. All right, so now once I position my image here, I can go in and update my my actual image to a different one. And to adjust my width, just go to sizing, and let's bring it down to something like 15 VW. And if you want to, manually adjust the vertical and horizontal offsets, you can here. Or you can just use the visual draggable option here as well. But since I'm recreating this design, I'm just going to use the length units that I already know. So I'm just going to give it a vertical offset of 10 VW and then 16 VW here. And let's save it out. Let's go ahead and do another. Try to speed this process up. I'm going to duplicate this one. Actually, I'm going to duplicate this one and then drag it kind of down here a bit. Update my image here to something new. And I'm just going to keep that one there. And let's go ahead and make another one. Let's duplicate this one. And let's drag it into place. You can see how really easy this would be from a designer's perspective to get things looking just the right way you want visually without having to, dive into the code and kind of be detached from the design process. It's really convenient to see it all come to shape. All right, so I'm just going to update my image for this one. And maybe I want this one a little larger, so I'll come to my max width here. There you go. Let's go ahead and make another one. Drag it over here. Go to my design, update my image. And let's update the width or the max width. Bring that down some. And let's move it over just a tad more. Something like that. All right. Let's go ahead and duplicate this one. See how easy this is to create new images with all those settings that we created already, or just carrying over with each one. Update my image. Let's guess let's just do this one. All right. Let's go ahead and cut down the width just a tad. Kind of gives the impression of things getting smaller as we go from the left to the right of the page. Let's duplicate this one, move it down, maybe to here. And let's go ahead and update my image. This image kind of has a more vertical length to it. And as you can see here, this one is overlapping as we, according to the normal flow of the page or the document, you have each image that you add in order will overlap the previous image by default. But we can, of course, go into, let's say, update this image, go to my position options, and you can see the Z index is 0 by default. But if I give it, a -1 or something, it would hide behind all of this image, and I could, adjust it accordingly. I'm going to save that out. And let's go ahead and add maybe 2 more images about. Yeah, let's go ahead and create, I'm going to duplicate this one, drag it over here, and update the actual image here. Decrease the size, the max width. All right. Oh, looks like I'm accidentally created 2 of them down there. Hold on. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and go shrink this one. There you go. And let's go ahead and make 1 more. This time we're going to drag it over there to the top right. Didn't duplicate it. Let's duplicate it. Drag it over here. And let's update the image. Let's do a more horizontal image there. Can't really see it. All right, let's go ahead and increase the size of by increasing my max width. And let's position it slightly outside of the viewport, but not that much. So I'm going to bring my horizontal offset back down some. Well, that's a bit much. Something like that. Let's do 70. There you go. And maybe I can drag it a little bit farther out. There you go. I'm going to save that. And last thing I want to do is basically just add a background to my settings, or section settings. So I'm going to go in there, add a background image. All right. Can't really see my text very well, so I'm just going to update my color there. There you go. All right, let's go ahead and see how this works on the live page. All right. So as you can see, now I have all my images in place with my interactive element. When I hover over each one, Got the light box effect. Going to inspect it and kind of play around with the responsiveness of the design so we can see how it responds. You see, we need some work on the phone aspect of it. Let me go and change. There you go. Just so you can see how the design responds to the browser window. There you go. We got some flickering going on. I'm not sure why that's happening in this preview, but it wouldn't happen like that on the live site. But it does, until you get to phone, it's going to stay in place for the most part, right? Actually, it will stay the same. Maybe if I do this, I'm just going to take it out of here. And I'm going to just kind of shrink the browser window for you in a new window so you can see. It's not as choppy as it was in that little preview. See how it just kind of stays in place? It looks like we have some adjustments to do in tablet and phone. Probably, and this is a good time to just remind you, sometimes when you're adding responsive values in Divi, let's go back to here. So because I want to, make sure the phone display is right, sometimes you need to go back in and for example, my size. Sometimes if you add it to desktop and then add it to phone, you need to make sure and check tablet as well, that it has a value that you want it to have. See right here on my width option, it's set to, for my images, it's set to auto, which is fine. Auto for tablet, but then phone, I want it 75%. So just go back over the tabs, make sure that the value is what it is. Excuse me, is what you want it to be. Because sometimes it doesn't inherit it maybe like you are expecting it to. So double check that. I'm not sure. I'd have to go over, let's see. Let's go to my row design settings, and maybe on, nope, that all looks right. I'll have to go, if you want, I missed a few steps in the live tutorial, but go ahead and go back to the blog post and, check over the settings with a finer tooth comb to make sure that it gets all those responsive design settings correct, so it looks great on tablet and phone. Just to show you the, let's see. Let me go ahead and show you this one. Yeah, so there you go. This is how it's supposed to look when you shrink it down to phone. You see how it goes to one column. But once you get to tablet, it will, keep that same design throughout, and it will scale nicely as you increase the width of your browser. All right. Let me go ahead and make sure and address any questions that you have. I know it's been a while. So looks like Uncle Social says, when duplicating these images, what determines what they will appear on top of the image you duplicated? Because I noticed you didn't have to change the z-index to make the duplicate appear on top. Good question. So If you don't change the z-index or don't mess with any of the indexing, it's just going to, by default, follow the normal flow. And the normal flow is the next element that you add, like in the HTML, like in Divi, it's going to be like modules or columns. So if you add another module underneath, excuse me, underneath the previous module, well, that one that's underneath is going to sit on top of the previous one by default. Because this is the way I understand it. That's part of the normal flow of the page and how things are structured. But if you want to change that, you'll need to update the z-index. So if you add an image, a module underneath a previous module, then give the module that was before it a greater z-index, well, then that will sit above the one that comes after it. Hope that answers your question. You use the important attribute in custom CSS in the advanced tab. Is there a way to add this to design tab elements in the module dialog? Let's see. You are referring to when I added the height to the column, Scott, I believe. And you know what? There currently isn't the option to adjust the height of a column in Divi. That's why I added the custom CSS to do it for this example. And I added the important right after it in the phone, just to kind of override any of the settings that may be within the backend code. I haven't double checked to make sure that I needed that important after it, but that's the reason that I did it. All right. Any other questions? We have a question from Peter. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Spilling. What about dynamic text flow around non-square pictures? Dynamic text flow around non-square pictures. When will that become a feature? Unfortunately, I don't really understand what you mean by that. It's probably something that is well known that I'm just not aware of, but text flow around non-square pictures. I'm interested. Maybe if you can give me more information, we can address it later on in the chat there. But this is it, guys. I'm just going to make sure and double check, make sure no more questions, and then I'm going to call it a day. Let's see. All right. All right, that's all I got for you this week, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe to our blog newsletter, our YouTube channel, and like us on Facebook. That way you don't miss out on any future live streams that will be coming your way. In fact, we have one coming up on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's the weekly WP Roundup. And we'll be back here next week on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for another Divi use case live stream. Thanks again for watching. We look forward to seeing you in our next video.